Feminism...
It's about women.
No, feminism attacks men. It talks about the patriarchy. And it says that the patriarchy is bad, and that men have suppressed women since the dawn of time, and that this is a terrible thing, and that women have suffered under the yoke of men forever. And of course, that is rubbish. Since the dawn of time, in every country, every culture, men and women have worked together. Most people have been poor in history, and still are. Feminism is an ideology. It's called cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism looks at everything as the oppressor and the oppressed. And Marx himself, in the late 1800s, said that they wanted to destroy the family, and that the person that held the family down and the one who suppressed the family was the father. Totally biased towards men and masculinity. Men love women. Men and women tend to prefer women and look after women better than they do men, because it's biological. We care about women. Most feminists are very wealthy women, and the lesbian women, some of the lesbian women who hate men, they are not lesbian women who get on with people, because there are women like that. They're giving the gay community a bad name. Feminism is an ideology. Women are people like men.
But you can't deny the fact that men, for the most part, have always exploited women.
No, they haven't.
Or oppressed women.
They have not. They have not. If you listen to nothing I've just said, men have not suppressed women. Men love women. Often the head of the household is a woman, and that's not a problem. See, we've been taught this for decades, that men are the suppressors of women. Men are not. Men and women work together. Men and women men and women, they used to love each other. Women now have been brought up for 4 decades to blame everything on men. Feminism not only insults men, it insults women. It says women are helpless victims. It says men are horrible monsters. Men are not. And women are not helpless victims. Men and women are different, and within both sexes of men and women there's huge differences of character, just the same. To have an ideology that says there's the oppressor and the oppressed is rubbish. It's called the feminist lens. When you look at something through one lens, you're only ever going to see one side. Most people don't realise, with history, all the main things, this huge mountain of ideology, slogans and accusations against men, it's one-sided. And there's also an enormous amount of exaggeration. From domestic violence to all the different things which are about what we talk about when we talk about gender. Most men adore women. Women make different choices to men in life. Most women do. Not all women. Some women make choices like men do. The women who make similar choices to the most rich, successful and rather scary people, rather scary men, they tend to be rich and successful and sometimes rather scary too. There's about 19% of women who work like the most successful men work. Most men don't work like that. To say that men suppress women is rubbish. Men and women have worked together since the dawn of time, in every culture and every race. And men and women are complementary and they love each other. We have a huge problem in our society with fatherlessness, that little boys and little girls don't have a father. And it doesn't matter in the relationship who's the boss, whether it's the man or the woman. We always say it's the man that suppresses, or we're always told that. That's not true. Often the mother and the grandmother is the one with the social power. And what happens in a family? We have a modern world. Everyone is entitled. We all have opportunities, if we're bright enough, if we're lucky enough to get on with life, and if we're lucky enough to do the things we want to do in a job. Because often the best jobs are the ones that are the most fun and the highest paid. But a lot of people, most working class people, men and women, have rather boring jobs, and the more boring they are and the dirtier they are, they often tend to be lower paid. Men and women complement each other, and we're constantly hearing that the men are the suppressors of women. And a lot of women are now in the food chain. They don't have a man to protect them. Not that women need protection in that respect, But when you're working together, people they say that the woman's place is at the kitchen sink. That's what they accuse men of keeping women in the house. And my great-grandmother, she might have been pleased to be able to be at home because she wouldn't have been in a factory. Most people don't realize the feminists are upper class, upper middle class women. Most women can't afford to have everything. If you're rich, you can have nannies, you're probably well educated, you can have everything. Most women don't have that. Most men don't have that. Over 90% of the homeless are men. And biologically, for biological reasons, we don't empathize with men as much as we do women. Often on homeless leaflets, they'll show a woman. But they're the absolute minority when it comes to people sleeping rough or homeless. And we don't care. Men compete with each other. That's one of the reasons. And when you look at the prison sentencing, like for like, when a woman commits a horrendous crime and a man commits the same horrendous crime, he gets booked, he gets thrown in jail, she gets a suspended sentence. And a lot of the judges are male. They don't think there's chivalry, they don't think prison's a good place for a woman, especially a mother. But if a human being, an adult, commits a grievous harm, with grievous bodily harm to someone else, to molesting someone, to murdering someone, to abusing another person, or lying and stealing, then they should be punished. But we don't do that. And we need to start doing that because our society is becoming so malleable, which means manipulatable by the government, because we don't have strong families. And a family with a husband and wife that are happy together, or reasonably as people can be, then we have a strong community, a strong society. The violence of feminists against family, against masculinity, against men, against women who might make the traditional choice is awful. It's not men that tell women what to do, it's bloody feminists. And there's an awful lot of women who do decide, I'm going to now stop working and have a family, who they get hell from their colleagues. They can't believe it, she's not going back to work. So what's happening to the children? We're growing up with rubbish television, and we're growing up being looked after by teachers, and political correctness is right through the education system telling us what we should be teaching young people. In America, when the state took over the schooling system, there were riots in the streets. The Americans in those days didn't want other people teaching their children. They knew what they felt, they knew what faith, whatever they had, it was their right to teach their children. They lost, of course. The only people who didn't lose were the Amish, which are quite amazing people. And they really are traditional. And they separate the men and women, the different work. I'm not saying we should do that. But when we look back on history and we're told that when men and women separate their work and their responsibilities, that was all wrong. No, it wasn't. It's not all wrong. Every culture, every colour, every creed, every race have done that. And the feminists are elitists, extremist women who don't like men. And they look down on working class women as well. I saw a video recently with the Brexit. There was an older woman with a sign to say leave, because we have left. These are the people who want to stay, and they're still protesting to change the vote, which we voted to leave Europe. And this woman came up and was screaming at this older woman and tried to grab a sign and said, you take that down, you've got no right to be here. I would like to ask that woman, what is your job? Because it won't be a practical job, a hard-working job like that. Because that woman who had the sign, an older woman, she drove buses, touring buses, coaches in Europe. That was her job. I've met women who are truck drivers. They don't have time, they can't afford this crap. This other woman, her job would have been in a politically correct, maybe a government job, maybe a feminist type job, maybe some job to do the EU, a non-job, a high-paying job, which is probably interesting, enjoyable and social, not long hours and rather boring or stressful in that respect, although some social jobs are very stressful. But we must look at this. The BBC is so feminist and so cultural Marxist, so politically correct. We've forgotten about our society. Our society was not bad. It had things wrong with it. Yes. People say to me, tell me how you can make the world perfect. You never will. But what we need is to check things. We don't question anymore. We're all taken up with entertainment. We're slowly being weaned off it because it's getting boring. But we're watching sitcoms, a lot of people, watching television. We used to debate and discuss. The early 1900s, there was a mass movement of religion, and women were actually at the head of a lot of that. They discussed poverty. It was when eugenics and horrible things like that came up. But there were massive debates about what was right and wrong, and much based on Christian society. I'm not a Christian, but we live in a Christian, or we did live in a Christian society, and the Christian society is quite inclusive. It has things about it which aren't good, but it also has things about it that are good, which says take responsibility for yourself, and that if you make decisions in your life where you choose to harm people, that's upon you. And it is a victim narrative where you say, oh, I'm a woman, it's not my fault, I've been suppressed all my life, or some other thing like that. You're taking the responsibility of your life off you. Not only that, as soon as you tell someone that they're a victim, you're disabling them. Some people come from very poor backgrounds, and they end up very wealthy or very happy people. They work very hard. If you told them that they are victims and they're being oppressed, it might have stopped them in their tracks when they were young. They may never have got up and achieved and pushed forward, men and women. We've been here nearly 3 years now, and it's all changed. Since Brexit, the whole atmosphere, public atmosphere, has changed in Britain. And there's been a lot of things to do with that in politics, in America, here and Europe. We're in a time of change, and it's quite scary. And looking back at the time before the Great Wars, it's quite frightening, the upheavals. It's quite frightening to everyday people that live and don't have that much money to escape, and are invested in, if they've got family or their job, survival, and paying off their house if they can, or their rent. We are in scary times. So it's good to look and debate and talk about things. There's alternative news programs on the internet which tells you a lot of what's happening in the world, and that the BBC won't. The BBC decides what it will tell you. They have meetings. It's all very political correct, and there's so many things they won't discuss. Sometimes the things you need to discuss are the most hair-raising, scary things. That's why my hair's all sticking up. That's what you got to discuss, the scary stuff. And that's why Speaker's Corner is brilliant. It's good that we got different religions, faiths and things here, because if it's here, it's not bottled up and breaking out in other places. The police come here because often there's fights and things. It tends to be religious people more than anything. But this place used to be booming with political debate, and there would have been violence then too, probably much more, because we're in a less violent country in some respects than we used to be. Men are less violent than they used to be against each other. And by the way, most violence and murders are men are the victims of. Most of the homeless are men. Most of the suicides are men. And most people don't sympathise with men. Erin Pizzey, who opened the first battered woman shelter, found she tried to open a shelter for men and no one would fund her. She was funded by very wealthy people, and one, including the Queen, bought her a property back in the 70s. And just as an example of how we think about gender, which is also biological, when the first 100 women she got in there that were violently beaten and were hurt, 62 of them out of the 100 were as violent as the men. The women that weren't violent were easy to help. She got them out of that. The women who were violent you really couldn't help without long-term counselling. And they all came from violent families. This is what it is. Violence is not gendered, as feminists tell you it is. It's generational. Children who grow up in violent environments where there's constant fighting or physical violence, they're affected by it. And they go on themselves often to resolving family issues in a violent matter, even if it's arguing. Domestic violence goes both ways, and yet there's very few shelters for men. And feminists have blocked that discussion, which means it's not fixing it. Nobody wants man or woman, woman or man hurt. But when you're dealing with a violent person, it's very difficult because they don't know. And her book, Prone to Violence, which you can still get, is worth reading, by Erin Pizzey, Prone to Violence. And I've known women who've read it and they said that's very disturbing. It is a disturbing book to read because it shatters everything we believe, that the feminine is kind and gentle. Violence is not about size, it's about intention. And people who have violence in them, I come from a violent family. And I'm glad I wouldn't have children, not because I'd want to hit them, it's the fact that I blow up, I can't cope with things often. I don't hit people, but at home, I just don't cope very well sometimes if everything gets on top of me. It's what happened to me, it's what I learned, it's in me, it's hard to change. But I'm at home on my own, or I've actually learned with people. I don't do that, luckily. Probably because I was afraid of people when I was younger, and I'm lucky for that. The prisons are hellholes. If men get violent, they go to prison. And the hellholes, they destroy them. And the huge population, male population in prison. And yet, when women commit, when violent women, I will say, commit the same offences, terrible offences, they get suspended sentences from male judges. Because they don't think prison's a good place for a woman. It's not a good place for anyone, but we need to come up with some way where it's actually done more equally. So this is when you hear about the men's rights, or the anti-feminists, or there's a thing called MGTOW, men going their own way. There's a lot of men who won't marry now because of the divorce, what divorce does to men, where they can't see their children anymore. And the judge says, yes, he has a right to see his children. The wife says no. And the court battle goes on for as long as the children are children. It can go on for 18 years or something and the father still can't see it because she won't do what the judge has told her. And she can claim that the father is an appalling man, that he's done appalling things to her and the children, and it can be disproved. And she doesn't get in trouble for the perjury. There are a lot of men out there. There are bedsets full of broken men who are I was going to say pissids then, who've got alcoholics, who are broken men. And the worst thing that's happened to them is that they can't see their children. And to say that men, as feminists, see them are the oppressor is rubbish. They've now turned it into the patriarch is the oppressor, which means father. And it isn't. Men love their whole life. The best thing that happens to a man often is having a family. And I know a lot of people from Fathers for Justice, and families need fathers. And these things which men in divorce, over 70% of the divorces are initiated by women. Not to saying divorce is a bad thing, it can be a good thing if people can't be happy, but shared parenting is the way forward. Unless one of those parents is an inappropriate person, then it has to be proved. It's not just to go forth and then everyone assumes if she said he is, then he is. Because if he said she is, people want it proved, and it's very hard to prove. So, stop listening, go online, go on alternative news programs. Doesn't matter if things put you off when you first see it on one or two programs. See it and make up your own minds. Don't listen to academia, which is basically behind what we hear on the media. And I mean by academia, I mean the universities, women's studies courses, political correctness. It's cultural Marxism. It's looking at everything through the lens of the oppressor and the oppressed. And people aren't like that. It's a dumb black and white way of looking at things when you've actually got two windows to look through, the male perspective and the female perspective, and often the male's perspective is about responsibility. It's not about dominance. And this is what we're here to say. So I hope people like it. We've been called women haters, and that we live in our mother's basement, and that we have no dick, and all these other things. It's old hat. So you become quite weather-worn to the accusations. I was called a racist today as well. So we're there up, you know, but it's rubbish. And thank you.